Hi, Don. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Louie. It's great to be here.
I am so excited to do this show with you. First of all, I read your book, The Smarter Accountant, and at first I thought it was a book to make me smarter. But what it really was, in my opinion, was a mental health book for professionals. To be quite honest, I've never seen one for professionals. So you probably know where I do, but I think you're unique in that field. So tell me a little bit about why a smarter accountant means better health, mental health is required.
Sure. So the reason that I titled it The Smarter Accountant is because as accountants, we are intelligent, right? We're smart. We're like the smartest people in the room, and we enjoy that fact. If you're in any, back in the day when we did in-person continuing education classes, there would invariably be somebody to raise their hand and give the exception to the rule of what the teacher was teaching. Everybody wants to be the smartest person in the room. And what I learned, I've been a CPA now for over 30 years in public accounting. What I learned and that I teach in the book, I was like, oh my gosh, like I have a high IQ. I did, great at summa cum laude in college and all the things. And it pales in comparison to once I understood how my brain works and how to manage it. And then I talk about the 12 typical pain points that accountants deal with and how brain management is the key to dealing with every single one of those issues.
Well, that's interesting that you said that, because pain points are, to be quite honest, I think I can label at least 5 or 6 of them just off the top of my head. What I really liked about your book too is, and you just mentioned it now, is accountants are problem solvers. And being a problem solver also causes us issues. Is that correct? The problem solving brain does impact our mental health, right?
Yeah. So what happens is that our brain, when we're born, is like a blank vinyl record. And then we have this programming and we're taught things by our parents and by teachers and our peers and stuff. And it starts to create the grooves in our brain. When we're not aware of this, then all of a sudden we become stressed and overwhelmed. We're working too many hours, but then we're surrounded by so many people that are experiencing the same thing that we normalize it. We don't think to question it. And I was the same way. I didn't think to question it until I found this, I called the secret to the universe, until I found this secret about how to manage my brain. And I was like, oh, I can uncheck. In the book, I say, if you check any of these boxes, and you said, you could check 5 or 6. Well, I have the Smarter Accountant quiz I have on my website. It's a simple agree or disagree to these 12 issues. And I would say most accountants score probably like a 10 out of 12 that they relate to that many issues.
Is that a good score or a bad score?
That's the whole thing. A high score is not a good score.
It's not a good score. Okay, just checking, because people love, when you say 12 out of 12, I aced that exam, right?
No.
So, fair enough. So let's talk a little bit about the brain. You comprise the brain into 2 components, and the toddler brain, which in your book says we actually use 80% of the time. And when we do use it, we're doing it almost unconsciously. And then there's the higher brain, or the superior brain. I could be wrong on the title, and that's the brain that we should be using more often. So if you could go into the description of the 2 brains and why we should stop listening to the toddler brain, or at least control it.
Yeah. So that's like the crux of managing your mind. So there's 2 parts of our brain. There's the primitive lower brain. I call it the toddler. And it is the part of the brain that has been anatomically with us since humans lived in caves. It is motivated by 3 things, which is called the motivational triad. It's motivated to seek pleasure, number 1, to avoid pain, and to conserve energy. Okay. So that is like its main job. But then we, as humans evolved, we actually developed this higher brain. And the amazing thing about this part of our brain is that it allows us to think about what we think about. It allows us to delay gratification, because the toddler is all about gratification. And this higher part of the brain, I call it the supervising parent. This is the part of the brain that can manage that toddler, that can delay the gratification, that can see the long-term effects of maybe not taking action right now or not doing something right now. So the supervising parent, now the toddler brain is the brain that we use without our awareness 80 to 90% of the time. We're at the effect of this lower part of our brain, this default programming. Your toddler brain is different than mine based on all the different programming that you had growing up and all the different thoughts and beliefs that you've practiced. So we have these neural pathways in our brain, and they're like these little roadways. They start out very, very thin. They're not, strong. But if we think something over and over and over and over again, that neural pathway gets very, very strong, and it just becomes like this automatic. Like I brush my teeth the same time every single day, or I do this thing every single day. It's that neural pathway. But then we're in this accounting profession. Not only are we thinking certain things, but we're hearing the same thing from other accountants. So it's strengthening that neural pathway. So then we tend to think that that's a fact. We think that what we think is a fact. But what I teach is that there are very few facts in this world, and a lot of what we think is a fact is our story about those facts. So we want to understand how to use the higher brain, the supervising parent, to intentionally choose how we're going to think rather than letting the toddler. I say to accountants all the time, you do not want a toddler running your life, running your time, or running your business.
Well, you're so true. But the funny thing is that if we don't recognize the toddler brain, and again, this is me from an inexperienced level saying that, then we actually think that our higher thought processes, which could be influenced by the toddler brain, we don't realize that they are being influenced, right? That's what you mean by control. It seeps up, right? Rather than the other way around.
Yeah, it just happens.
When the kid takes over the house kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? And
yeah, I've often equated it to like getting on a bus without any sign that's saying where it's going. And then you wind up like in a really bad neighborhood and you're like, what happened? That's what happens to us day in and day out. You're like, you're at work and you're like, all of a sudden you're pulling your hair out and you're so frustrated and you're stressed and you're overwhelmed. And, you're blaming the date on the calendar, or you're blaming the workload, or a client, when it's the only reason that you feel frustrated, stressed, overwhelmed is because of that toddler brain, because it's making everything that's completely neutral, it's creating meaning. It thinks thoughts that you're then at the effect of.
And you don't recognize that component. That's the part that. So what I really like is your model of the 5-part model. It's circumstances, thought, feelings, action, and results. And the reason why I said it, because what I want to do is talk about all 5 of them in their distinctness. The first one, which at first, circumstances, we actually equate something to them, but in your model, circumstances are neutral. There's nothing technically. A circumstance is a circumstance. Can you just explain why that is and why it's neutral?
Yeah. So a circumstance could be, it's factual. It could be proven in a court of law. A circumstance is actually pretty boring. I was just working with a client the other day, and he said, it was one of my female clients. She said, I only slept 6 hours. And I'm like, that's not factual enough. I went to bed at this time and I woke up at this time. The word only just has a weight to it. I only slept however many hours it was.
Right.
So circumstances, when I work with my clients, that is one of the key things that we hone in on. We want to make sure that we have a very clean circumstance in the model. We want to make sure that it's really factual and that it's pretty boring. Like today is September 14th. Everybody would agree, right? You can look at a calendar, you could see September 14th. Most accountants in public accounting are like, oh my God, there's 1 day left to the deadline. Oh my God, this is horrible. This is stressful. Tax season is so hard, right? So there's the date, or there's a list of tax returns that have to get done. There's a very neutral circumstance, but that means nothing, but that our brain gives meaning to.
Right.
And that's the thought line.
That's the number 2. That's the thought part, right?
Yes.
So when you take the circumstance and make it neutral, then you isolate the thought.
Yes.
And that's where what you talk about is where the thought then generates the feeling, right?
Yeah.
They're so identical. They're so connected, right?
Yes.
So
what happens is that it's really, the circumstance line is the first line in the model. There's a reason that it's in the order that it's in. So the first line of the model, you have a circumstance. Then the next line is a thought. That is just a sentence in your brain. It's just a phrase that your brain has about a circumstance. And then that sentence then creates your feelings. So it's the circumstance happens, or it's, the weather, something somebody said, a boring neutral fact. Then your brain makes it mean something. You and I could look at the exact same circumstance and have completely different thoughts because we have completely different brains.
Right. So, for example, April 30th. Well, actually, U.S. is April 15th.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is the April 15th. For me, the thought is that's my tax deadline. Then it creates a feeling. So I get that. But the date is meaningless in that sense. Is that correct?
The amount of work you have to get done, what the date on the calendar, the time of year, none of it means anything. Something that somebody said, a client, I was just working with a client, and one of his clients was calling him after hours. And so I said, well, we have to get really, really factual. What time did he call you? It was client C called me at 7:30 p.m. on blah, blah, blah. So what is your brain making that mean? His brain thought, this guy's a jerk. Like, what the heck is he doing? Like, what's wrong with him? And blah, blah, blah. And it just told the story. And then he felt frustrated. So then what happens is the fourth line of the model is your actions. That is your actions, your reactions, and your inactions. So it's the things you do, the things you don't do, and the way that you react. And so from the feeling of frustration, because he was thinking the client shouldn't be calling me at this hour, not because of the circumstance. So the circumstance of the client calling at 7:30 did not cause him to feel frustrated. It was what he was thinking. And I gave him an example. I said, because I know how to manage my mind and I'm teaching him how to do it. I said, I had a client that called 7:30 on Friday in the United States Labor Day weekend. So my phone rings and I'm sitting there with my husband watching TV, and my husband goes, "What? Who is calling you at 7:30 on a Friday on Labor Day weekend?" And I just laughed. I'm like, I'm not stressed about this, because I looked at it and I go, that's adorable. Like, that's not happening. I'm not answering it. I didn't make it mean anything, but my husband made the same exact circumstance mean that client's a jerk. What the heck? Shouldn't be doing this, whatever. So, yeah.
So what you've done to yourself is you took a circumstance, right? Because you changed the fact that you're not reacting to it. You're not taking it on a personal level where you get a negative reaction. You actually took a neutral reaction.
Yeah, I'm choosing intentionally with my higher brain how to think about that circumstance.
Yeah.
I'm choosing that. In the past, before I learned how to manage my brain, I would have reacted the exact same way as my husband.
Yeah.
Would have been cursing out the client and made it very, very dramatic. But now I understand that my thoughts are optional.
And the funny thing is, the action could have been the same. You could have, in both situations, you would have ignored the call. One, you would have ignored it and still had a good time watching TV. The other one, you would have been pissed off thinking about how dare that guy does it. Right?
Ignoring it, and then I would have complained in my head, and I would have spun, and I would have been like, wait till I tell, blah, blah, would have just gone in a spiral. And I just was kind of like, all right, well, they'll hear from me on Tuesday because it's a holiday weekend.
Don, you know what? When you go through it, it seems so, how do I call it? Common sense. But I guarantee you, and when you were saying that, I have a smile on my face because I have that all the time. Like, there's things that happen all the time that now when you think about it in that format, you go, 80% of those reactions could have been controlled much better.
Yeah.
And my stress level would have been. So that I think that, like I said, the 5-step model is brilliant once you break it down that way. And the action thing and the results. So the action is controllable. And I like what you said. The results are basically the proof of what? What do they prove?
The proof of your thought. Your thought in some way, shape, or form will become your result. For example, what I was working on I'll give you an example with this client. So the thought that he had about this client calling him was, he's not respecting my time. And then he felt frustrated, and then he was spinning, and he wasn't paying attention to his family, which it was family time, and blah, blah, blah. And so the result, when we put all the actions that came from him being frustrated, when he really, really looked at every single action, because when you're filling in the model, you want to make sure it's everything that you're doing everything that you're not doing and what we would see you doing and not doing, or maybe what's going on in your head, right? Those would all be actions. And the result for him, which he kind of like gulped a little, was when he thought he's not respecting my time, the result was I'm not respecting him as a client and I'm not respecting my time. So those were each optional results. And he realized, like, wow, when I'm thinking he's not respecting my time and I'm frustrated and then I'm spinning and I'm complaining to my wife and I'm not watching, he was with his family, I'm not doing this and I'm not thinking of my plans for the next day or something like that. Like, you're not respecting your time. So the result line is always for you. It's not for the other person. So it's always I fill in the blank.
So instead of he's not respecting my time, you change the he to an I.
Well, there are a lot of subtle nuances to really taking a look at what the result is, because, if you look at the model, it's the thought, then the feeling, then the actions, then the result. But when you look at the accumulation of all the actions, the inactions, and the reactions, you can see that the result was proof for his thought. When he thought that the client wasn't respecting his time, he wound up not respecting his own time and not respecting, the client.
So I like the model. I got to be honest with you. To be quite honest on it, even though I read the book, I haven't practiced it. So forgive me on that one. But I really like your model. I like the setup of it. Now, one of the things that it's hard for accountants to understand, and you being a 30-year accountant, we're not feeling oriented people, right? It's you are touching a sensitive subject for us, because we got into the accounting business not to feel,
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And the reason why I say that is because when I talk to my CPA friends or my accounting friends, they go, I don't want to hear other people's feelings. So I got here not to do feelings, right? And now you're going, let's look at all the feelings. Let's look at all this. So this is great. Because I'm with you. I think we're all human beings. If we take the human factor out, we're missing a big chunk, right?
Well, here's what I would say to accountants, and I get that because I also was like, feelings, well, that's like soft skills. I don't want to talk about that. Here's what I would say. If we are perpetually stressed and overwhelmed, you are being incredibly ineffective in your actions. And stress and overwhelm unaddressed and feelings unaddressed then lead to burnout, then lead to unhappiness, then lead to less job satisfaction. They lead to the great resignation. If we don't get clear on the importance of emotional intelligence, being aware of what we're feeling, I say that the number one question that every single accountant needs to ask themselves every day, all day long, is how am I feeling? Or why? Why would that be? Right? Why would you need to ask yourself, how am I feeling? I'll give you an example. So I had this tax return that I was doing, and every single year, I don't know what it is about this tax return. I have such a negative reaction to it. And in the past, I would be like, oh, I'd be frustrated doing it and just, whatever, just pushing through it, right? Just trying to get over it. Once I learned the model, I was like, all right, how do I want to feel about this? How do I want to feel that will actually drive my actions? So I decided that I wanted to feel determined. Instead of feeling frustrated by this tax return, I wanted to feel determined. Now, just because I decided I wanted to feel determined, my toddler brain was like, no, we feel frustrated or we feel whatever. But I'm like, no, I want to feel determined. So while I was working on it, I kept checking in with myself because I knew that the actions that I take will be driven like you put gas into a car, okay? If you are fueling that car with sludge, i.e. stress and overwhelm, that car is going to seize up and it's not going to work as effectively as you want it to. Same thing with our feelings. So when I use the best fuel I possibly can to take action, guess what I do? I get more done in less time.
So you rolled right into the next one. So honestly, because the next topic is the badge of honor that I call the badge of honor, which is
busy,
working. Yeah. Overworked. If you go into a CPA office or you go into anything, people will sit there. Well, I worked 60 hours this week. I work 65. Oh, I work weekends. And everybody's trying to outdo themselves on the amount of work. When they hear someone who's working 35 hours, I only work 35. They look at that person like there's something wrong with them. So how do we get that component where the things that cause us a lot of stress, we wear them like badge of honor? Like you
Yes.
just key things, deadline stress,
Yes.
overwork stress.
Yeah, I can totally relate to this. I was walking in the hallway of my building, and there were two accountants walking ahead of me from a different office. And one of them said to the other, "Did you see that Joe's car wasn't in the parking lot last night?" And the other accountant said, "Well, he must not be very good at what he does." And I was like, "Guys, seriously." Like, I didn't speak to them and they weren't talking to me. I overheard this and I was like, so if I can get more done in less time and I can feel much more energized and I can enjoy my life and I'm not angry about being a CPA and I'm not that stressed and overwhelmed CPA who's like, oh, I can't wait until I retire. Why wouldn't you want that? So when I learned the model and I applied it to every single area of my life except work, because I was like, oh, that's the last frontier and that's not going to happen. Well, I applied it to tax season. And my husband, I didn't tell him I was doing this. My husband said, what happened this tax season? I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, you were so much less stressed. You were much easier to be around. And then I told him what I did. And he goes, keep doing that. Whatever you did, keep doing that. So now no joke, I have stress-free tax seasons. I work the same that I did before. I'm actually doing, more complicated returns, but I know how to manage my brain. So therefore I know how to manage my feelings. So when I'm using the best fuel possible to get my accounting work done, I get more done in less time than anybody else in the office.
Right. Your car analogy is stress, fear, those will clog up I don't know how you can think. The more stressed I am, the harder it is for me to concentrate. The faster I get tired.
Right.
The more I procrastinate.
Yes,
it
very
fuels
much.
all these negative.
Think about what you do when you're stressed. I say that email is accountant's drug of choice.
Right. That's right. Perfect.
Right. We're stressed about doing something and we're like, oh, I'll just check email because I'm being busy. I'm still quote unquote working. So I'll do that. Or I'll do something easier. I can't take whatever it is that I'm working on. We're always looking for, and it makes sense. Our brain is right. Think about the motivational triad again. Seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. Everything we do as accountants goes against the motivational triad. Seeking pleasure, a lot of what we do is not pleasurable. Avoiding pain, a lot of what we do is painful. And conserving energy, everything we do takes a lot of mental energy. So it's no wonder that our toddler brain is freaking out all day long with all the work that we have to do. And it's creating this story around our work. But when we use that higher brain to retell the story, I used to say for decades, tax season is so hard. And then I worked with a coach and she said, you realize that's a thought, not a circumstance. And I was like, oh, you silly woman, you're not an accountant. You have no idea what you're talking about. And she's like, no. It's an optional thought. I was like, okay.
No,
so I started to like, all right, I'm going to challenge that. I'm not going to think tax season is so stressful. I'm going to choose to think something different about it. And I felt so much better. And when I felt better, I did better. I showed up differently. My work improved. My time management improved exponentially because I wasn't fueling myself with stress and overwhelm.
So here's one with regards to perfection. One of the things with time management, and I, in my consulting practice, when I consult and help firms build a better practice, one of the things is their desire not to let go of things, the fear of letting go and having someone else do it. So because they're afraid that something's going to go wrong, right? Do you get that a lot too? Is that because that seems like a big issue when we have a very busy person at the top end in a small practice? I notice there's about 60 or 70% of their functionality is things that could be reallocated to others, but there's that fear of letting go. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. So I say that accounting is a breeding ground for perfectionism. We all tried to get, the best grades we possibly could. We were all very, very good students, hard workers. If you pass the CPA exam, you're pretty damn smart. And so we just take that to the next level. And then of course, we start out as new accountants, and we're indoctrinated into this perfectionistic type of, setup. And that's what we think is needed. And so I see that perfectionism, first of all, it's not sustainable. You have to look at what is the net negative effect of everything needing to be perfect. And you have to, when you do the model on perfectionism, well, how does that show up? Right? Perfectionism, what is the feeling that's driving perfectionism? Is it fear? Is it a lack of confidence? Right? There's a feeling that's driving the actions that show up, right? What your perfectionistic actions would look different than mine. This firm owner that you're talking about. So how is it showing up? What is the feeling that's driving those actions? And do you like the result? You have to take a look at that model. Do you like the result? Is it useful or is it helpful? A lot of accountants, they don't see a different way. I say that accountants, unfortunately, we tend to argue for our limitations, right? I say you can have a stress-free tax season, and accountants they can't fathom the possibility, therefore they argue for their right to have a stressful tax season. It's like, really?
Yeah. Oh, that's a perfect example. In other situations, I do get that. I'm trying to help them build their better quality of life. And when I show them a pathway that I've known in the past has worked, you're absolutely right. They argue to stay where they are.
Because also our toddler brain loves what's familiar. To our toddler brain, it would rather you stay safe in the cave and not venture out.
Yeah.
But safe in the cave, your toddler brain does not care what the net negative effect of you staying safe and keeping things exactly the way they've always been. It doesn't care. It's just its main mission is to keep you safe, and it sees doing something different as dangerous. So it means well, but we have to just be willing. I say this to accountants all the time. We have to be willing to be wrong. That's tough for us.
There's the perfectionist issue. The thing is, we're problem solvers. We're not allowed to make mistakes. I think the biggest fear of an accountant, or in a lot of professions, to be quite honest, is since you're the expert, the last thing you're designed or taught to do is be okay to make a mistake, because you can't be perfect, right? So
here's what I
like
also
that.
think with problem solving is that as accountants, because we're trained to be problem solvers, here's the tricky thing. If we have a problem that we can't solve, we think it's unsolvable. Okay? Because we're smart. So if it could be solved, we would have solved it already. So that's why I feel like writing the book and going around, going on podcasts and speaking and doing, webinars and stuff like that, is that I want accountants to see that I'm an example of what's possible. My clients, all of my coaching clients are an example of what's possible, right? It is solvable. You just haven't met anybody that solved it until now.
You went right to the point, right? Because the tax-free tax season, they haven't figured out that to solve that problem, so it's unsolvable. If you're going to have tax season, it's going to be stressful, right? See, here's another one that keeps coming up. Why do we keep comparing ourselves to others? What's the urge for us to say, well, what's that other guy doing? Or if he's doing it, then I'm doing it too. That means we're all the same. What is that?
Our brain is programmed to compare us to others to see how we measure up and to worry about that, right? Just go back to the time. Remember that primitive brain, the one that's running our lives 80 to 90% of the time, we had when we lived in caves. And we have a tribe mentality, because if we were left to our own, we would die. So we needed to be around other people. We need to be in a tribe. Now, the comparison, right? Think about it. If you were looked upon unfavorably, you would want to know, what's happening, right? It could be a threat that somebody else could be taking over and you could be ostracized from the tribe. So we're constantly, or our our brain is wired to measure each other, but we take it to an extreme, right? Think about, you're living in a cave with 5 other people. Okay, but now we've got social media. We're surrounded by people we've never ever met, and we're comparing ourselves to them. It's not just like the people that you work with, or maybe some people that you meet at a conference and stuff like that, where it's like comparison on steroids.
Yeah, I would have to say technology, the internet has been great for us for productivity and being able to do more. But the comparison model that we're so used to, like you said, in your little group was the old days. Now that group is the whole world. That kind of changes the dynamic. So how do you handle that component today? Because
Yeah.
that's the reality actually
Yeah.
right
So
now.
imposter syndrome is so prevalent for accountants, because think about it. Like when we're in, high school and we're in college, we're some of the smartest people in the class, right? Then we work with a whole bunch of other accountants. We're like little fish in a big pond, where before we were big fish in a little pond. So now we start to like, wait a minute, well, what do they know? And all of a sudden they know more than me. And then, we start to worry, and then we start to like inundate ourselves with continuing education classes and taking this and taking that. So we really have to understand what our brain is doing. So our brain, there's Joe who's sitting, 2 cubicles away from me, and I'm feeling imposter. I'm feeling a lack of self-confidence. I'm feeling unsure or self-doubt, let's say, right? That's the feeling. I'm feeling self-doubt. Joe knows 1031 exchanges really, really well, right? And I'm like, oh, he knows more than I do. Well, when you feel self-doubt, how does that show up? How do you act? How do you react? You want to understand what's happening. How does imposter syndrome, or dealing with the compare and despair? Well, it's a nice idea, but really, how does it show up in your life? What is it keeping you from doing? And then when you see that, then you say, okay, he's got his specialty. Now, what can I think that would make me feel how I want to feel? If I want to feel, I love the feeling of curious. It's one of my favorite feelings to go to. I wonder what I could learn from him. That's a great thought. I
Right. That
wonder
changes the
what,
dynamic
yeah, I
completely.
wonder
Yeah.
how he learned what he knows. I wonder if I could ask him, blah, blah, blah. Instead of that compare and despair, we can come from a place of curiosity. The actions that we take and the result would be completely different.
Brilliant. I love that. All you're doing is you're going from he's better than me or she's better than me or whatever to how can I learn from them and how can I get better with engagement, right? So
Or it could just be
that
like,
changes the
that's
dynamic.
amazing. Like, good for him. Like, that's the feeling of appreciation. Like, I don't need to know what he knows. Thank God we've got Joe, because Joe's the 1031 exchange person. Like, we always want to go to Joe. Yay. I don't need to compare myself to Joe. I can choose to celebrate Joe.
So let's talk a little bit before we go. Is one more topic I want to cover, and that's criticism, because criticism is something that happens whether we like it or not, and it's a thing that causes us a lot of stress. How do we deal with criticism at a professional level, and how can we diffuse it so that first of all we can use it as a positive rather than a negative, and also neutralize the ones that we should literally ignore?
So criticism is an interpretation, right? I talk about criticism in the book, but criticism, a person said words. That's it. That's the neutral circumstance. The person said, a client said, you didn't get me my tax return on time, or my previous accountant would have filed that on time. It's our brain's interpretation that makes something defined as quote unquote criticism. Person saying words, no matter what they say, they could say you're a jerk. It's completely neutral. They just said words. What your brain makes it mean is everything. And so when you understand how to manage your mind, then you can pause, because your automatic brain is going to look at that as a negative and make it, you'll start to spin and worry, or maybe you're mad at the person, maybe you're angry or whatever. But instead, you can absolutely neutralize it by choosing, I talk about this in the book, by choosing to look at something as feedback. instead of criticism. It's just a slight pivot. And just the thought, well, that's interesting. Right? I just had a client, he was with the former firm, our firms merged. He did not like how the new firm was handling things. And he let it be known. And he's an attorney too. So he was sending these, really in-depth emails, blah, 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 all the stuff. And the director was getting, really flustered and frustrated. And I'm like, no. I said, there's no, he's just sharing words. You get to decide how you want to interpret those words. I interpret it as, and I always try to make light of things to make it fun for me. I looked at it as, well, thank God he's no longer a client of ours. He broke up with us. Yay.
Right.
That's how I'm like, he's saying the same words. I read the same exact email as you. And I'm like, that's interesting. So glad we're no longer his accountant.
Yeah. I like how you interpret things. You can look at the interpretation and how you use your thoughts and feelings changes the stress level and how you react. And
yeah, for me.
But that's the important person though, right?
That's it. Right?
The key is you.
It's
right?
me.
That's the key.
The director was looking at the same exact email as me, and he was feeling frustration, not because of the email. Because what if his brain was deciding to think about that email? And I know I can intentionally choose to think something different so that I can feel different, so that then I could, when I felt neutral about the whole thing, I went back to work and did the rest of my work. He spun for an hour. He was complaining. He went to the former partner. How would you have handled this? Should I do this? Should I do that? I don't understand. Then he contacted the guy's new accountant. Are you okay with the way, did we handle things okay? And the new accountant's like, of course you did. He's looking for validation, right? He's spinning. And I'm just like, just going back to work.
Well, thank you so much, Don. First of all, The Smarter Accountant to me is a mental health book personally, but it's a way for us. What I really like about it is giving back control.
Yes.
You're taking back control of yourself. And just like anything else, if you work at it and you listen to Don's book, to be quite honest, you will get that control. And then it's how you deal with stress and how you deal with deadlines and how you look at it on an internal basis makes a big difference in your quality of life. And professional life is very, very stressful. And
it doesn't have to be
right at the top. No, but I'm just saying the job is stressful. How you deal with that stress is in your hands, right?
Yeah.
Basically. So,
right? Yeah, but I mean, the book, I just had a consultation call with a client, now a client, and he said, I read your book. I loved your book. I read it a couple of times. He said, so no offense, but why would I need you to coach me? And I said, because here's what I tell accountants all the time. Knowledge is not power. Applied knowledge is power. And so that's why I have a 6-week program that I teach accountants one-on-one exactly how to manage their mind. They get to choose 3 out of the typical 12 pain points that accountants have. And we dive deeper into that. I said, the book is like the menu and my coaching program is the meal. You can just go to thesmarteraccountant.com. I have a quiz there, the Smarter Accountant quiz. It takes like 5 minutes and you can see if and how you are underutilizing your accountant brain. The book, you can find that on Amazon. And then I have a 6-week program called the Smarter Accountant Program. And I tell accountants all the time, like, coaches will say, we have to work together for 6 months. And I'm like, who has the patience for that? I know my people. Accountants do not have the patience for that. So that's why I've distilled everything that's in the book, everything that I've been working on for 10 years. I have distilled it down into a 6-week one-on-one program.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thanks again, Don. I really enjoyed our conversation and I really enjoyed your book. So I recommend anybody to at least read the menu. If they don't want to take the program, read the menu at least.
Read the menu. I also have a podcast called the Smarter Accountant Podcast so people can listen to.
There you go. So read the menu, listen to the podcast. Right? Please do. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.